So Kaya, good morning, goeiemorgen. I'm truly honoured to be here today and offer some of my reflections on the future. I'd like to start by acknowledging where we are this morning on Ghana Yurta in Tandanya, Adelaide. It's really nice to be back. For those of you who remember pre-pandemic life, I worked here for a couple of years. But I'd like to take this moment to really sincerely and respectfully acknowledge the caretakers and custodians of the lands and waters around us. The songmen and women, song people who sing the stories of these places, their old people, and the many young people who will take that responsibility on into the future well beyond our lifetimes. I'm going to do a bit of reading, a bit of prepared work for you today, but then I will go into a bit of freestyling and talking more openly about some things. But for those of you who don't know me, my name's Glenn Iseger-Pilkington. Glenn Iseger-Pilkington. And I'm a Nhanda and Nyoongar man from Western Australia. Thank you so much for that opening keynote. I think it's really important to acknowledge where we are in this moment. Children really are our future, and to have flown in last night from a place where kids are being killed is pretty horrific actually. Thank you for honouring that, and for everyone who went to the vigil last night and around Australia as well. So my country is on the coast. Nhanda country is in Kalbarri. My cousin is down the back here today, so I just want to acknowledge all my colleagues and family and friends in the room. But our people are from the mouth of the Murchison River, and our country is a national park that none of us can afford to buy property in. However, that does mean that we have beautiful untouched country that we're able to visit. My Nyoongar family are connected to Balladong people and to Wilmanbudja, but I'm also a member of a post-war family that came out from the Netherlands in 1952. My other homelands are on the other side of our planet. My family left Europe in hope of a better life. They went from a 2-degree day in Amsterdam to a 40-degree day in Perth, and moved very quickly out to a place called Mount Magnet, which is one of the hottest places on the continent. So they were quite courageous people, but I'm glad they did, otherwise I wouldn't be here today. Both parts of my heritage, my paternal and maternal lineage, are really important to me, have informed all of the work that I've done professionally and personally. I've never lived on my own country. I grew up in the Kimberley, on Nyikina and Mirawong country. I spent a lot of time on Yaru country and Larrakia country, and those places all feel very much like home to me to this day. But since the 1990s, I've lived in the southwest on Wadanji and Wajak Budja, but my heart and my soul really belongs to the west. I've spent the last 20 years working with Indigenous artists and have done a lot of things, a lot of exhibitions, a lot of writing. But last year I was appointed into my current role, which is as Curator of Fremantle Art Centre, where I have the great privilege of working with First Nations artists, but also with settler artists and international artists. So I'm really proud to be occupying a space where I can actively make decisions without having to ask for permission all of the time. So while I'd like to talk to you some more about Fremantle Art Centre, I'm mindful that we should really make our way towards the future. So today's about the future, it's about change, and it's about leadership. And what I really wanted to talk about was the idea that the future really is a kind of abstract concept, and the future really is now. But we'll get to that when I take you on my journey through the space-time continuum. Firstly, here are my acknowledgements. I don't know how long this presentation will really take, so I'm just thanking everyone up front, so no one feels forgotten. Just a small cultural warning as well, that there are images of works of art in this presentation by artists who are no longer with us, but I have not included images of deceased people. So a little about the future, about change and about leadership. In reflecting on this idea, I asked myself, what does the future look like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? It's quite difficult to get a sense of these things at the moment. In some ways I reflect on this idea, and the future feels really hopeful, with a groundswell of activity that we've seen for First Nations or Aboriginal artists, communities who have absolute command over the cultural space in the now time. and I feel incredibly hopeful about what the future might look like. It feels bright, and it feels like change is really afoot. Well, it did until a few weeks ago. Then I remember that we're in the midst of not a climate emergency, but a climate catastrophe, that our natural world, our country, and everything held within its embrace continues to suffer as our society makes unreasonable demands of it, extracting wealth from it, clearing important habitats and ecosystems that have for millennia supported life, and in doing so clearing our important cultural sites. Just going to catch up with the PowerPoint. That's where my people are from, just there, little infographic for you all. And that's kind of where we've got to now, this idea that change takes time. So in this climate catastrophe, our country does not sit silently through this mistreatment. Instead, it responds accordingly, resulting in changed weather patterns, flood and fire, rapid endangerment of species, rising temperatures, all of which can be seen in our recent history here in Australia. Through that lens, the future feels ominous, murky, and somewhat less clear. It's all right, we will go upwards. The mood will lift. So added to this are the concerns that hover around us as members of our own global community as we emerge from the other side of a pandemic which created great upheaval in our lives, limiting our movements and freedoms, creating unprecedented risk for our mob. And now as we hurtle towards the end of 2022, we exist under the threat of nuclear war. We see trends of populist far-right ideology embraced as if the last 50 years had never happened. We see rapid reversal of politics surrounding race, gender, reproductive rights, sexuality, a complete undoing of so much progress. It is in this environment that I find it incredibly hard to imagine what the future looks like. And then, of course, there are the personal factors for each of us in our own worlds, the cares, worries and responsibilities of family and community, the necessity to take stock, to spend time on our own physical, emotional and spiritual well-being, the need to connect with country and kin, and all of this competes with our modern life, while we carry the burden and the scar of our recent colonial past, of invasion, of cultural erasure, and of the violence that will echo through each of us and our descendants for generations to come. In a nutshell, it's a lot, but it is our story. It can all add up to a feeling of being overwhelmed, a feeling that we might just be crushed under our own weight and our own worry. And it's no surprise that our communities have the highest incarceration rates in the world and the highest rates of suicide. And here we go. Yet, we are all individually and collectively embodiments of resilience, survival. Our very presence here today is a public declaration of the failure of the colonial agenda, a failure of imperialism and testament to the wisdom and strength of our old people who knew, sung, cared, studied and shared stories of this place. Stories that will also echo through our very being across generations. Stories which take shape in paintings, ceremony, poetry, dance, song, design, fashion, comedy, composition, just to name a few of the ways that our people share with the world the essence of Indigenous Australia, stories of us that predate this last 250 years. So I'm deeply proud to stand here with all of my old people around me and with all of your old people here too, surrounded by people I admire who undertake incredible work under duress to share our stories. When Francesca Cibillo, a friend, colleague and mentor of mine for the last 10 years, asked me to speak today, we started by talking about the day being about youth and the future. And I quickly reminded her that I had just stepped over the line into my 40s and my youth was very much behind me. And Francesca gave one of her signature chuckles and said, "That may be true, Sonny, but you've spent all of your career working with young mob," which is A, quite true, and B, perhaps Francesca just agreeing with me not being young anymore, which is fair. It's also really hard to say no to Francesca, so here I am today to talk to you not about my youth or the long tail of it slowly seeping out of my body, but to talk about some projects I've worked on throughout my career that have been centred on future-proofing the Indigenous visual arts industry, rendering a record of culture and creativity, and creating a future for artists that is dynamic, sustainable, and centred around self-determination, agency, and autonomy. The future, when we think about it, is a really strange concept. As we get older, we realise that the future is never really that far away. Wait for it. The future is now. And, you know, I think entwined with ideas of the future are also these notions of hope. Hope for a better future, hope for equality, hope for sovereignty of our country, of our bodies, of our stories, hope for fairness. In this way, this hope and the future is also entwined with notions of change, of transformation, and of betterment. So many of us in the roles that we undertake are seeking and making these very changes. I remember a moment not too long ago in the grand scheme of things where I had a brutal and hard realisation that the changes, the betterment that I was working towards was likely not achievable or attainable within my career or perhaps not even my lifetime. To realise this in your early 30s is a hard thing, to face a truth like that. And while this is true, at the time felt crushing, it was a potential future, not a reality, but I had to face it. Around the same time, I also found myself acknowledging that the exhibitions that I made perhaps didn't have the embodied power that I naively thought they had, and that exhibitions were unlikely to change the world. Again, another brutal truth, but a moment that I think many of us as First Nations curators have had in our careers. So in these two realisations, which from memory happened in the same year, it was a pretty tough year, another realisation unfolded, which was that the exhibitions I produced, rather than being future focused in aspiration, could and should be focused on impacting the lives of artists and storytellers who featured within, and they should celebrate these people and the cultures they emerge from. They should speak to and survey our now time, a term I first encountered in the writing of an amazing colleague and friend of mine, Sisonke Umsamang. In this epiphany, in this moment of transformation for me curatorially, I realised only then would my exhibitions have influence and bearing on the future. Now, this may feel like I'm taking you on a journey through some warped space-time continuum, but what it is to say is that in acknowledging and committing to meaningful investment in our realities, we do in fact transform the future. That in releasing ourselves from the sometimes heavy burden of fixing the future, we create new space to celebrate our now and render an archive that will undoubtedly have bearing on the lives of future generations. Okay, back to now time. I hope you've all enjoyed that quick journey. So quickly, I wanted to talk to you again about that first heartbreak, the one where I surrendered to the idea that change may not happen in my lifetime. Well, the next lesson, about 5 years later, was very much kind of a counterpoint to that, which was that nothing is certain and life is full of surprises. The world has in recent times changed immensely for First Nations people. It's changed quickly, particularly within the arts. Life for our people is still incredibly tough, but there has been change and we have more allies in the world. While it's easy for us to link those changes to our work, this moment and every moment is really connected to the work of our elders and to our leaders in the arts, through our parents and grandparents and all of our ancestors. Without you all and your endless efforts and unwavering tenacity, our now time would look very different. So thank you. So while I've taken you on a journey through the most profound professional realisations of the last decade for me personally, and these have really informed the work that I do curatorially, I guess one of the things that happened in that space was doing less of this, less talking publicly, less being a voice and less thinking about the future, and more self kind of, an exile that I place myself in to actually undertake the work. And I think that talking always needs to be paired with the work. And so for a long while now, I haven't done a lot of public speaking, so I'm sort of making a cameo again, just for a brief moment. So what I wanted to do is take you through some exhibitions with the idea that they do in fact make change in the world. And lately I've sort of, well, not lately, for a while now I've sort of thought of myself as a curator, but it's a weird kind of Eurocentric word that I've never been particularly comfortable with. So there's a couple of other things that I do in my job. Recently I've been embodying some kind of wiggle character to work with children and write children's labels, which has been great fun. But yeah, whilst what I'm going to show you might look like an expanded version of my LinkedIn profile, I have used projects that I've worked on as I'm able to speak to them with clarity and understand the intent behind each. And I know so many of my colleagues around the country are working on projects which are just as incredible. So I wanted to acknowledge all of you and the incredible work that you are doing. Grounding us in the place we're at now, I wanted to start with this exhibition, Ngora Home in the Nyanadara Lands, that I presented when I worked at the South Australian Museum as a part of the Tarnandi Festival. And one of my colleagues, Kate Rice, who supported that project, is in the room. This was an incredible exhibition that for me was quite transformative in that it allowed art to be in concert and in discussion with culture and with place and with story. It wasn't this white box kind of approach that came out of modernism. It was about connecting story, song, ceremony with people and with life. And it was really centred around this idea that, to stay on homelands is not something that kind of Aboriginal people choose to do, that it is in fact a responsibility to care for that place and to hold it in custodianship. And in this was this great opportunity to work with young people like Roxanne Newbury and Christabel Porter, who are kind of working in new spaces of photography and film and installation. There's quite a few photos that I can't show of this exhibition just because of people who have passed away. But it was, again, really centred around kind of connecting young people and their stories up to, into this art space that's often just about white walls, crisp rooms, and doesn't really have that greater context other than a label or a didactic panel. But for me, the most joyous part of this was the transformation of one of the zones in the exhibition to Christabel Porter's bedroom, from the breeze block walls of her home in Warrakurna through to the minky blankets that, that adorn kind of almost every Nganadara person during even summer, through the desert. And it was a great exhibition that really connected place and story and did so in a way that brought Nganadara home to Kaurna country. And I think that the important part of this is that our art is often seen out of context. And for me, in exhibition making, particularly as Aboriginal people, we have this opportunity but great responsibility to give context to the work, where it comes from, who it's made by, and the culture that sits at the very core of it. And I think that sometimes the white box model of contemporary art exhibition making can be, well, it doesn't always do that. I'm just trying to say that nicely. One of the things that this was really in response to was the comments that were made by the Prime Minister around lifestyle choices of staying on country. And so this was Nganadara people's opportunity to kind of talk about it not being a lifestyle choice, but being a great responsibility. This was one of the most beautiful moments of that exhibition, a recreation of Mrs. Giles' home and her art. So the veranda that she makes the work on transported into the gallery context to give people a sense of that, of where these works are made and where they come from. We worked with a whole lot of great partners on that exhibition, so Papalankaja Art Centre, Jalili Arts, Warrakurna Arts and Jumpy Desert Weavers, along with the whole team. But I think the most important part of this exhibition was that in that time I probably spent about a year, maybe 15 months on country with Nganadara people, kind of really getting a sense of how we centre Nganadara politic at the core of this exhibition and the story that can and should be told, rather than a story that was that we decided we'd tell as curators before we'd even entered communities. Another amazing thing about exhibitions for me was the idea that while we couldn't travel during the pandemic, our work could and our ideas could. And this was a really, and particularly in Western Australia, I'm sorry, but our lives were relatively unaffected for a long while. I think we were able to do things that the rest of the world and the rest of the country weren't able to do, which we're deeply grateful for. But Nyinalangan, the Nyoongar word for to come together or together. And so this exhibition, which I presented at the Perth Institute of Contemporary Arts, was a great way to kind of bring voices together that couldn't travel physically, and to talk about, I guess, the kind of pressures and the challenges of that time, where we were right in the throes of a pandemic, the Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and so never had there been more risk for First Nations communities communities to come together and to stand together in a protest environment. So to have exhibitions that could do this, and I just want to acknowledge the work of Sharon Egan in the room here today, who I've had the great pleasure of working with. Sharon's works, which are made from the balga tree, really talk about her ancestral relationship to country, and she talks about these cores of the tree being her old people, and the idea that walking past these objects in the landscape and touching them is like connecting with your ancestors who would have walked past these very structures before. It was a real delight to work with Sharon, as per usual, and also with Esther Kickett, who talked about, I guess, the importance of matriarchy for Nyoongar people, and talked about some truth-telling within her own family. So you can see underneath the cabinet, there's a star steel picket and a brick. And this is a kind of hidden history, or a history within her family that her family aren't ready to speak about, but is there to talk about. Yeah, I guess that idea that we have to be careful with how we hold people's stories and look after their truths, and not feel that we have agency as curators to make the call on what gets told and what gets shared. So Yabani Kickett is an amazing young woman who I'll talk about in the next section of this display. We also had Peggy Griffith's amazing truth-telling video about her grandmother, and a story of kind of first contact with people who invaded the Mirrawong country, as well as the work of Damien Shen, which talks about all kinds of truths from mission times through to his own kind of experience of navigating being a bicultural person, having different belongings. But yeah, for me, that idea of being able to make exhibitions that could travel and share story at a time when we couldn't move was really incredible. I'm so glad to be able to travel now, but at that time it felt like, to be able to do anything in the cultural space, and to be able to even just have a small group of people come along to an exhibition was a really kind of thing to be celebrated. Some work by Dean Cross in that exhibition as well. This was a work called Ngara, the word for to reflect, to take time to pause and to consider things. And so this was an invitation for the artist made for the public to come and make an offering. And it was a really kind of salient work in that at that time loved ones were passing away around the world, people weren't able to travel, so there was so much to consider in that moment. And this invitation, over time the work grew and took more of the gallery space over. Equally, exhibitions play an important role in connecting us to our brothers and sisters in the broader region. So this is a work called Into Something Else by Jasmine Togo-Brisby, an Australian South Sea Islander artist who's just relocated back to Queensland after years in Aotearoa. But yeah, again, to be able to create conversations around identity which create invitation for people who are not just First Nations people, but people who belong to other cultural groups that have been displaced and are part of a similar colonial narrative. It's incredible work that's made of about $5,000 worth of crow's feathers. She didn't shoot them. They were purchased on eBay, I think. James Tyler, who's in the room. Hey, James. Really great to present work from James over there that talks about the absences of Aboriginal story, names, from our kind of psyche, but also from place, and the reinsertion of narratives relating to our people into our Australian consciousness. I guess the other part of what I've been doing lately is working with young Aboriginal curators. For me, and I think we picked up on this before, it's really important that we as late 30, 40-year-olds make space for young people. And I think that was a big part of me choosing to no longer have such an active kind of life in public space, because there were so many great, young, tenacious, vibrant voices contributing to that space. And, when you've heard your own voice a few times, you're sort of like, other people to talk. Let the other people talk. So for me, I worked with Esther or Yabani Kickett on this great show called Nhanda and Nyoongar, and that is Listen Women Speaking Now. And at Fremantle Art Centre, we're really committed to amplifying voices of communities that have for too long had to fight for real estate in cultural spaces. So this small exhibition was incredible in that Yabani really took the reins of that curatorial role in commissioning new work, but also in terms of her interpretive approach and the way she told stories that were really true to a young Yorga's voice. And yeah, just the way that transformed visitors' experiences. It wasn't the middle-aged white voice of contemporary art that we're so used to hearing. In that exhibition was the work of Ilona Maguire, another young Nyungar woman who also did a really wonderful piece of work with the Fremantle Biennale called Mumbakai, which was a big drone light show revealing kind of stories of place along the Derbarl Yerrigan, which was just absolutely amazing. And some people may have seen some of the work at the Darwin Festival recently in that space. More work by the wonderful and incredibly talented and very busy Sharon Egan. So Sharon's, again, this work is using Balgo resin, and she creates a paint in which to kind of render these surfaces that are both depictions but also physical embodiments of country, and within that a small loan which talks about sisters. So this work's quite beautiful in that the larger panels talk to Nyuni or brothers, and that small work which was done I think maybe 10 or 15 years ago was a work that talked about sisterhood and imaginings of relationships with sisters as a member of the stolen generation. So again, just handing space over, like that's what we've got to do. We've got to hold space, make space, and hand it over. Like my job now is not to kind of be, to be the face of things. My job is to really support younger people to realise their dreams. And, in a space where there's a lot of pressure for me to curate like settler work and international work, it's like, yeah, maybe not. Maybe we just have a lot more Aboriginal work for a little while. And I think that is a pressure that I wasn't expecting to face in this role, having always worked in defined curatorial spaces for Indigenous people. A funny thing that Esther did in this exhibition was she refused to put any translations of Nyungar words in the labels, and she put this panel on the wall that is called Your Mandatory Nyungar Language Lesson. And so staff people were coming in and they'd go read a word and they'd have to run across the other side of the gallery and find out the word. But it was such a clever, playful, kind of satirical way of going, I'm not going to do the work for you. You guys got to learn, right? And so I love that, and we're sort of working with Esther to find other ways to make people run around the galleries and learn language at the moment. So, but I did want to play Esther. She really focused on kinship and family in this exhibition, and her mother, who's a poet, Lola Kickett, she wrote a poem about a young woman who passed away in Perth during some of our really tough winter. So I wanted to play that for you. I don't know that I can control that from here.
Speak for me, for I can't. Silenced by this cold death. I was a happy person, full of life, such as it was. It was mine. To live safe, healthy and free. To cry full sobs, to smile with laughter, to have a home filled with love and family. Speak for me, for I died. My voice silenced, my feelings numbed, my ears deaf to life, my eyes closed, open no more. Speak for me of warm summer nights, hot sunny days, beautiful bush filled with life, of me, my life, though sad. Speak of me with kindness, with a smile, with honour, with love. Remember me in the wind, in the sunshine, in rain, in all weather. Remember me, my smile, my laughter, my peaceful nature, my reflection of beauty. Survived on the streets, sleeping on cold concrete, no warm clothes, nor food to eat, freezing cold winter, ended my life. Just remember me.
So that was a poem, written by Yabani's mum, and we had a chair sat with a blanket in there to talk about the warmth that was lacking of this young woman in her life, and it was just such a profound moment to have audiences stopped in that moment to hear this kind of poetry and for Nyungar voice to really kind of fill that space. And, you know, we've done a lot of work at Fremantle Art Centre in an exhibition called Revealed, but for me, it's really important that brown voices are there all year in every possible way. We're about to announce some changes to the way we name our galleries. We're about to kind of undertake some really meaningful work, but that takes time to do it right and to do it well. But it's really exciting to not have to go and ask a chief curator if I can do something. I just get to do it, which is really fantastic. Of course,
Speak for me, for I can.
There we go. I get to do that with the great support of our leadership team. I guess the other thing that I'm really invested in is supporting collaboration, and I know that collaboration can often be the dirty C word of the art world, but you know, when it's done right and done in a supported way, artists are able to kind of manifest new ways of telling their stories, and do so in a way that builds skills and relationships. And this was a show called Jilla Kudjara, Two Snakes Dreaming, by Maru artist Desmond Taylor with collaborator Marianne Pugh. And so it was taking these works that talk about this Wadi Kudjara story of two men who were stuck in a law ground and had to make their way home. It's a much longer and elaborate story than this. But for Desmond, he was really interested in seeing his Jukurpa translated into new forms, into new modes. And so the curator who was in a role before me made a connection with a textiles artist called Marianne Pugh and was able to manifest these really incredible, highly tactile works. And so our art centre has a long history of supporting those collaborations, and you know, I think there's that kind of opportunity for Aboriginal people to choose how their work is used and to choose who they work with. And this was very much from Desmond. He came to the Art Centre and was like, want to make rugs. And so to be able to make that happen and to create new economic opportunity, which is central to all of the work we're doing at the Art Centre, is really important. And these rugs were just so incredible. I might just check in for time. Almost there? All right, I'm doing okay. And then just to kind of wrap up, one of the big exhibition projects that we do each year is called Revealed, supported by our Department of Local Government, Sport and Creative Industry. And we're able to, through this, create a big exhibition that surveys all of these art centres in our state, which, just as a reminder, is the size of India. And in doing so, showcase and give platforms to new emerging artists each year, or established artists who choose to work in new ways. And so for us, this has been a really great testing ground, but it also creates a massive amount of money for our communities. And we usually run a market alongside this, a professional development program and an emerging curators program. So in this one exhibition, which, you know, some people may just see the show, there's all of this capacity to nurture and develop younger artists and younger art workers in that work. And to wrap up, because I could waffle on for quite a while, I guess for me, you know, this idea of the future, and just coming back to that idea that if we affect change now and we make investment now, we are able to really impact and create a positive, sustainable future. I think if we are overwhelmed with this sense of the future being this thing that we have to fix, then we just get stuck there. We can never fix something that's far away if we're not really addressing the now. And so for me, my mantra for the last few years is less talk, more work, and do everything we can to sort of amplify voices and to kind of show up for our young people. Like, as I said, my job is now about creating space for the next generation of curators, and I'm really committed and passionate about that, and really keen to sort of see the way the next generation transform the work that we've been doing. And I'm really proud to be a part of a legacy of First Nation curators that are really committed to sharing and telling our stories in a way that centres us, both as the content but also as visitors and as the people who, it's about, really. So that's, in a nutshell, what I've been up to. The future is now, just a reminder. And yeah, I'm just really, really proud to be here and to kind of offer you a few reflections on how exhibitions and the visual arts can make change in the world. So thank you very much.